all languages, all programming languages today have something that's called a variable, or the possibility to use variables. And what are those? Well, you can consider them as kind of a box. Maybe you have a box where you say winter clothes, as you put the label on, and then hopefully you put your winter clothes into that box. A variable can kind of contain anything, and both Sass and Less have variables. They are syntactically a little bit different, but they work in exactly the same way. There is no big difference there. In Less, you write an @ sign to define a variable, and in Sass you start with the $sign. But otherwise, you can see in my code here, they are kind of exactly the same. Then you start to think, well, doesn't CSS contains variables nowadays? Yes, they do, and you can of course use pure CSS variables also and define them in the way you want them. And as both Sass and Less supersedes the pure CSS syntax, there is nothing stopping you from using CSS variables where you think they are appropriate. And CSS variables have one advantage, and that is that when you redefine a variable, and you can do this via JavaScript, for example, then it will cascade throughout your full web page. So everywhere that variable is used, well, then it will update everywhere. So that is a big advantage. In both Sass and Less, the variable values will be compiled into the CSS file. So there will be no variables in the CSS file in the end. So we will look at that shortly. So let's try to create a variable and to have something to style. Well, then we start by adding an h1 with some text. And then if you have selected the file and selected preview in Prepros, then ensure that you do that so you have that up and running in at least one browser. Then go to the style.css and add the accent color, and then set the h1 to use that accent color. And then when you save the file, you will start to see the magic in by using an application like Prepros. So let's do this. Let's go to our code here, and let's add an h1. Let's name this products or something, and that one. And now when I save this one, you will see that it shortly shows up in both my windows. And now if I go to style.css, let's define this accent color. And the value I had, you can of course use any color value, but I had FD AC3E, some kind of orange color. And then we can say that the H1 should have a color of accent color, like this. So now when I save this one, you see that shortly it turns both windows, they turn the text to orange. And what has happened is that now if I open up the CSS folder, well, now I have a style.css, and I also have a style.css.map. And this is a mapping function that is used from within the browser. So the browser can then reference back to the Sass file instead. But we leave that for now, and we will cover that later on. So now we have used a variable.